Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Harmony Insights Lunch Date. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and clients to use the DISC personality assessment. And these days, they're using them quite often virtually with their teams and remote workers. And so if you have any questions about DISC, we can certainly talk DISC. I'm also the founder of Harmony Insights. Nope, already said Harmony Insights, the HR Hot Seat Inclusive Mastermind community, which is a community for HR professionals across the country, 10 different chapters. And you can find out more about that on hrhotseat.com. Today, you have joined us for a Harmony Insights lunch date. And I, as I've been saying, have kind of put this together somewhat selfishly. You know, there was so much crap going on in the world, and I thought, you know what, I really want to be inspired by folks that I know and love. And today's guest, Bryce Conlan, certainly makes that short list. We're going to have a meaningful, actionable conversation today about the power of story. And as soon as I think of story and helping individuals and organizations tell their story, Bryce is the first person that comes to mind, in his company, Upper Creative. So Bryce, welcome. You may have to unmute yourself, but welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate being here for the lunch date.
There's nothing like welcoming your featured guest and having him muted at the same time.
I think that was my mistake. I hit mute on my end, and then it gave me an error saying I can't unmute myself. So
See, that's what you get. Well, I am thrilled to have you here. And our last few Harmony Insights lunch dates have been on various topics, but we haven't touched on the power of story yet. And I'm so glad that you were willing to have this conversation with me today and with the people who are joining us, because I think story is such an important thing on a number of different levels. I want to make sure we hit on those levels, but certainly individually. As we talk about the story that we're telling as a team, as an organization, we can hit this on so many different levels. And my guess is we're going to have people joining us today who are thinking about those different levels. So before we get into any of that business, give us an overview of who you are and what context you bring to this conversation.
yeah. So as you said, my name is Bryce Conlan. I am the founder and the CEO of Upper Creative, and we're a shop in town that historically has created video content for our clients. We will get hired by HR departments or marketing teams or CMOs or whoever to come in and figure out how do we take the whole of the business and condense it down into 120 seconds that can be, disseminated out over the internet through all sorts of different channels. And historically, that's what we've been. We've done video, and as a result, we've done story.
I love already that you said 120 seconds. And suddenly that makes me think of how succinct we have to be in telling our stories. And we'll get into some of this, but geez, you let me loose and asked me to tell you about HR Hot Seat or Harmony Insights. 2 days later, I'm still going to be talking if you give me that time. So I already admire that you can help your clients stick to 2 minutes on that. I promised people a meaningful, actionable conversation today. And I really want to start out by having you let us know, if you're willing to, how you have personally been impacted by COVID-19. I think we all have, to some extent. A lot of people are working from home that weren't before. Some people probably know of somebody who has actually gotten the virus, and who knows what our experiences have been. But how have you personally been impacted?
I mean, I think I could answer that question and take a day or two to do it, because there's a lot of ways. Professionally, definitely, I've seen some changes. My line of work, my clients tend to exist in the travel, hospitality, and sports and entertainment spaces.
Right.
So a lot of the projects that we've had on the docket have just been summarily canceled. There's been a tremendous, I'm going to say it like this, but I don't really mean it, but loss of revenue, in the sense that things that were going to happen that we were planning on can't happen anymore or won't happen now. So there's been a huge shift professionally. But even personally, like I just talked to my folks yesterday, and one of their neighbors, who is not much older than they are, fell out of bed last Tuesday night and just decided to sleep on the floor and just never got up. Like
Oh
that
my
was it.
gosh.
And it was, it was COVID-19, and they'd just gone through the trouble of moving uh, I think it's his mother into the house. So now there's an even more vulnerable person in the home. And it's just like, I don't know, it just became very, very real. It wasn't a statistic. It wasn't something to see on the news. It was my parents telling me about their friend, their
Right.
neighbor. So yeah, it's hitting on a lot of different levels right now. And for me, it really became very real.
Yeah, I would think so. It's so easy to reduce so much of this to headlines if that's all you're looking at. But then suddenly you talk to somebody who knows somebody who has this, and it certainly makes it that much more real.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that we've then been able to come together like this and figure out a way to engage our audience and one another in conversation that hopefully will be inspiring to other folks. Every time you and I talk, I know I'm inspired, so I'm happy to have this.
Likewise.
I'd love to start out by, if you wouldn't mind, painting a picture of what story means to you and your organization. I think it's one of those words that you think you know what it's about. I would throw communication in that category. Maybe brand and some of these other words where you're like, oh, I have a sense of what that is and what it means. But it's not until you start to unpack it that you really have an idea of how many perspectives people can bring to this conversation. So what does story mean to you and to Upper Creative?
Yeah. So it's a loaded question, right? And I will tell you a story to answer it. It was probably going back a year and a half or maybe 2 years now. Um, I started to notice that everybody was talking about story. Like, and before that, video guys and marketing, houses would talk about story, but suddenly it was everywhere. Like Facebook put up this new stories, like mini platform as part of the platform. And I started to notice on websites the about us changed to our story. And so suddenly I was like, wait a minute, like, what is this? Like, everyone's using this word, but it feels like it's being stripped of all of its actual meaning.
Hmm.
Um, so that kind of sent me into, I like to read. I like to, I just enjoy ideas and foreign ideas and struggling with, wrestling with definitions of things. And so I took a very academic approach to trying to intellectualize what is story. And I read everybody on it, right? Like Joseph Campbell, and I watched old Kurt Vonnegut videos, and I looked at Dan Harmon's cycle of story. And I mean, we just looked at everything and from every possible angle. And what we ultimately discovered is that nobody knows what story actually is, which is super surprising because we talk about it all the time. And researchers say that 60% of everything that we say and hear is a story, but nobody can actually define it
Huh.
in a way that makes sense. For some folks, it's literally coming from this idea of a history, meaning it's a chronology of events. First this, then that. Others talk in terms of very, classical kind of frameworks and arcs and narratives and deaths and rebirths and the monomyth. And there's all these kind of like structures that make a story. And somehow none of that really gets at what a story is. I think the thing that's most interesting about story, though, is while maybe we can't define it adequately or sufficiently, but when we hear a story, we all know it.
Uh-huh.
And that's what's so interesting, is that it's kind of fundamentally, story is experiential. And that's ultimately where I have landed in my world and my understanding of what story is yes, there's elements of, you need to be able to convey information. There's a communication, there's an intellectual component to it. But far more than that, I think that story is a tool of influence, and it's a tool of that uses the language of emotion
Hmm.
to get itself across and to make itself known. So for me, that's what story really is. It's presenting both information and emotion in a way that causes an influence on the person who hears it. And that's how I think about it these days.
I like that definition, and I would agree with what you're saying that quite often you see this arc, a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a narrative to it. And then you also mentioned the Facebook stories, which to me are more like a collection of snapshots. but it woven together, I was going to say tells a story, but there's that emotion is certainly tied up into it. And just knowing some of the people that we have attending today, for example, we have a professional in the arena of improvisational comedy, and he would have, and Matt, if you want to chime in here in the chat, anybody's welcome to use the chat area to chime in, ask questions and comments. Matt Elwell is going to say, well, I have a pretty good sense, from my perspective of how to tell story and how to have others tell their story, and then we have some people who are maybe recently unemployed that are saying, you know what, I certainly have a sense of a story that I would like to tell. And maybe I feel fully equipped to be able to tell that story, and maybe I don't. So my next question for you is, especially now with everything that's going on with the coronavirus, if you want to use that context, what do you think are some of the very specific challenges that individuals and organizations are facing in terms of how to tell their story?
Well, I think the opportunity that we have to tell story, actually, it's gone up, but the challenge that we have is that so many of us, at least this has been my experience, and thumbs up or head nods if this has been yours too, in that a lot of the communicating that I do in my world with friends, with my parents who don't live in my house, with my clients, with my colleagues, a lot of my communication relies on this kind of nonverbal, let's be in the same space and just get a sense for one another.
Hmm.
And so I think one of the big challenges that we have now is that we don't get to be in the same space. Now, even virtually, we're here together and we can, we're doing our best with the tools that we have, but it's still very, very different than sitting down with somebody where you can pick up kind of on their energy and their mood, and you're in a space that imparts to you kind of its own mood. So I think that's a big challenge of more broadly communication. The opportunity now that we have is, if we can tell story well, if we get good at this, if we get comfortable with the idea of connecting on an emotional level, using words and pictures and ideas to connect on an emotional level, then we can recreate some of that feeling even virtually and at great distance.
Hmm.
So there's an incredible opportunity that we have right now that's been thrust upon us. None of us asked for it. None of us wanted it. But we are now in a place where if we get good and lean into, and the truth is getting good at story, I think is more, it's more about being willing to go to emotional places than not, because intuitively we all kind of know how to tell a story. It's, are we willing to go there? But if we are
Hmm.
willing to go there, then we have an incredible opportunity to really stand out and get noticed. And that applies to job interviews. Like, I know a lot of people who are suddenly unemployed, and I've been telling them,
Hmm.
look, when the interviewer says to you, so why should I hire you? What they're asking you is, tell me a story. Because if you give them a list, right? If you go, well, I'm resourceful and I'm smart and I'm hardworking, that's a lot like telling somebody that you're cool. Like, if you have to do it, you might not be, right? Like, it's just, it doesn't really work. But if you are willing or able to tell a story that leads your interviewer to that conclusion on their own,
Hmm.
then they believe it about you. And so I can tell you that I am smart, intelligent, and hardworking without using those words, and you've come away with that impression of me and you believe it. So story gives us this really incredible opportunity now, at distance where we are, to paint these pictures for people that when we can't rely on kind of just being in the same space.
It
Does that make
strikes
sense?
me that vulnerability is very much a part of this. I don't know if you've used that word yet, but I think of Brene Brown and the work she does around vulnerability, but maybe implicit in story in general, or in a number of good stories, is this willingness to be vulnerable.
Totally.
And right, is that something that you would agree with?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I tell people there's 5 elements to any story, right? Any story. And this is, they're 5 C's. First is context. This is where we begin, right? It's kind of, it's our starting point. It's our baseline. And then there's a catalyst, something that changes, our status quo. It just upsets the work that we are doing in our world, or coronavirus, by the way, is a catalyst. It's changed a lot of how we do a lot of things, right?
And it's a C, so it fits in.
And it's a C, so we like it. Then there's the third one is complication. And I'll come back to this in a sec. The fourth one is change. This is when our hero or our character begins to win. And then there's now the closure, which is where we are and how things are now. It's our new normal. Now, in all of those 5 elements, the one that people tend to spend the least amount of time on is the complexity or the complication. They just gloss right over it on their way to the change, on the way to the big win, right? And it's such a mistake, because when you get into the, you kind of roll up your sleeves and you get down into the muck and the mire of the complexity that is life, that's where you really get to reveal your humanness, right? So what do I mean when I say the complexity? So let me tell you a story. I'm going to do this off the top of my head, but so it may not, don't write this down. It's not going to be a very, very good story, but it'll be a story. So a guy sees a gal in a bar, and he's love struck. He's like, this is it. This is the love of my life. And he goes over and introduces himself and asks her out, and she says yes. And so he's all excited. And so he goes on this date with her and finds out on the date that she's in an open relationship. So she's seeing somebody else, but she can see him too. And he's devastated by this. Well, that's messy, right? Like, we're finding out, oh, I can relate to that. How would I feel? Oh, I don't like that. Well, so then what happens? Well, he goes and fights and he wins. He says, look, I want to be with you, but I don't want to be with you like that. And she says, okay, I'm going to leave my open relationship to just be exclusive with you. Yes, a big win. And so things are going well. And then he finds out that she's pregnant with the other guy's baby. Oh, no. Ugh, complexity. Don't like it. It's messy, right? But it forces you as the hearer to examine what you might do in that situation. And that's where really spending a lot of time in the muck, in the mire, and expressing the pain that you're experiencing, the discomfort, the euphoria, whatever it is that you're experiencing in the complexity, is where we can win our audience over. We don't care where you start. We don't care where you end. We care that you went on a journey and you got there eventually. Bring us on that journey.
Yeah.
That's really fundamentally where story becomes a powerful, powerful, influential tool.
So this is one of the many reasons why I'm so inspired when I'm talking to you. I know you to have and I don't mean to use the wrong words here, so you can correct me, but I know you to be technically savvy, right? I know this about you. I know that you do good work behind a camera, but I also feel like when we talk, you were talking so much like a coach, that you get organizations to tell their stories. You capture it beautifully on film, but the magic is what you're able to pull out of people, that you are able to explain everything that you just explained, to get them to use very particular words to describe the headache that they're having or the challenge that they're facing, or to pull something into that conversation and into that story that might not be there if you just handed them, an iPhone camera and said, go, you have 2 minutes, let's get something recorded, right? So how is it that this person that I know who has built this company, who seems so technically savvy, who knows what to do with the camera, also brings this coaching approach to the work that you do? Is that something that you have developed? Is that something that, obviously you've developed, but has it come naturally to you, or has this been a learning process for you, that so much of what you do around story has to do with helping people get from point A to point B in ways that they may have never considered doing on their own?
No, I would like to say, I want to say, no, this was easy for me. I just sat down one day and figured out how to do this. And that would be a total lie. When my wife and I got married, and we talk in the realm of feeling, she's very much a feeler. If you know the Enneagram, she's a 4. She's like super, everything is a feeling, for her. And, I would say, she'd say, how are you feeling? I'd be like, I'm hungry. I'm tired. Or, any one of like 14 different flavors of angry, right? I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm agitated, I'm annoyed, I'm irritated. It was like, I had that kind of section of the wheel down pat, but the rest I was totally oblivious. And so it's very much been a process, both personally and professionally, for me, of learning how to tell a story. And yes, I started in a technical space. I think that's where most of us start. When we sign up to do something, we do it technically first well.
Mhm.
But I found in the work that I was doing is that I'd sit down and interview somebody, and they'd say something that was just so heavy or laden with emotion, and I didn't know what to do with it. It's just like, how does that fit? Like we're we're talking about the financial stability of a company. How does that fit? Like, what do we do with that? And it really took many, many years of telling, I would say, decent stories that were very technical. It took many years of doing that and always kind of feeling uncomfortable with that,
Mhm.
or started to really lean into, as I personally grew and matured and developed and got more, healed, got more in touch with my own heart and my own kind of bed of emotion, that I was able to start stepping into that space and really creating a therapeutic environment where
Mhm.
I've had clients tell me after we go through a discovery session where we find the essence of their story, where they're like, man, that was therapy. Like, I had no idea I still needed to forgive my dad. And like, we're talking about your business, but it's like, because we're not, and here's the truth, man. We really like to think of ourselves as complex. We like to think that we've got, these different compartments. My work is here, my relationship is here, my friends are here, my kids are here, my whatever. But the reality is it all blends. Like,
Mhm.
we only have life.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it all ties together. So I very much see myself now as a therapist walking into meetings with my clients, just to discover, because we're probably going to discover motivations to go back to childhood.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to put them on display, but we're going to find them. And that's going to probably be the reason why you're doing the things that you're doing today. um
Well, this
so
has
it's
been
very
so
exciting.
helpful. I think we've laid out that context for sure, and we've identified some challenges, and I appreciate everything that you were just saying about your own journey. I would love to, as we move toward 12:30 here in the end of our conversation, I would love to shift toward helping those who are attending today
Yeah.
um, tell their story better or help others tell their story. So I know there's some folks again in job transition that are here, but I also know that there are some folks who are service providers helping others in some way tell their story. I know we have at least one learning and development professional on the in the conversation here who is helping people get from point A to point B, and story is involved with that. Who are you? Where are you looking to go? How can I help you get there? Um, where would you like to start? Let's start maybe. I'll just answer that question for
Yeah.
you. Let's. This is great interviewing, right? Let's let's start with helping the people who are challenged by telling their own story, because I think that that's a good solid um, place to begin.
Bottom line, when it comes to telling your own story, you only really truly need three things. And it's going to sound cliche, but you need to know where you're beginning, and you start kind of, actually start at the end. It would probably make it easier. And the first thing that you need to know, the end thing, or the third thing then, would be, sorry, make edit, right? Start at the end. The first thing to discover, which is your final point, is, what do you want your hearer to know about you? What do you want them to know? And maybe that thing is about you, about a character trait, or about something that you can do for them, for their business, for their whatever, right? Like, what do you want them to know? And that's very different than knowing what you want to tell them. What do
Mhm.
you want them to discover? Then go all the way back to the beginning and figure out where you want to begin, because that's up to you as the storyteller. You could start way back when you were born. You could start at your great granddaddy's, whatever. You could start 6 weeks ago or yesterday, right? Like, you get to decide where you begin the story. So knowing what you want them to know at the end, knowing where you want to begin. Then the third thing is just very simply, when did you realize the thing that you want them to know was true? So that's like when it became real for you. Because if you can paint a picture from where you begin to when it became real, then they will likely end up in the same spot of understanding what you now know to be true. And
I,
so
l- I
with
l-
those three pieces, that's how you can tell a story right away.
I like starting with the end in mind. That's a classic Stephen Covey approach too. Like knowing where you're going is remains your compass. Figuring out how to get there. Um, you mentioned, what do you want them to know? Is it fair to also ask, what do you want them to feel?
So the feeling component is always question number two
Okay.
for me. Uh, and yes, it's critical, but that's kind of in how you tell the story, is
Okay.
understanding what you want people to feel. Um, Ultimately, if we telling story that leads them nowhere, then it wasn't a particularly influential story. And
Hmm.
frankly, those are the only kinds of stories I'm interested in telling.
Hmm. Wonderful. All right. So we've set a baseline for figuring out how to tell your own story. What if we are in a position to help other people tell their story? I'm assuming recommending a similar framework will help, but is there unique advice you can give to people who are in a position to bring story out of other people?
Totally. Get super curious. Get super curious and just start asking questions. And if you've ever done the 7 layers of why exercise, um, so that's a great one. If you ask somebody, we're going to do this, well, ask them why. My kids do this; they're experts. But ask why, and then wait for a response, and really get curious. Listen to the response, and then wait for, like, when it comes back, ask them why. And if you can do that 3 or 4 or 5, 6 times, by the time you get to about the fifth point, the fifth why, they're discovering things about themselves that they never knew. They've never
Hmm.
verbalized, they've never understood, but they've gone so deep into their own selves that now they're coming out with the real motivations. And that's where stuff gets interesting. So if you can be like, put on your Sherlock Holmes cap, right? And I guess get a pipe if that's your thing, and just get super curious about the person who's in front of you, and suspend all judgment. Don't try to interject. Just allow them to discover their own story. That's an incredible, and because you don't have to do a thing after that. Like, you're just helping them discover kind of all the key pieces.
This really resonates with me on a small business owner level, but I think that there's a very close tie-in to when I was a practitioner as well. And as a small business owner, I've talked about this. One of my goals is to understand the headaches that people are bringing to me, and allowing them to do most of the talking, actively listening myself, being curious, asking questions, allows me to get to the information that I'm looking for potentially through story. But if I go in off the bat and say, oh, I do disc, I'm not quite sure what your headache is, but I do disc, and I think you should use disc, I've lost my greatest opportunity to really get to know and understand what their story is, where they're looking for it to go, where it could go, maybe that they hadn't expected, whether it's already set in stone or if it's a choose your own adventure of some sort, that they're in the middle of. But I think then that is also related to the work that I did as a practitioner, and perhaps those on the call today who are in the job search. Are you sitting down with people and saying, hey, I'm exactly who you want for these reasons, and you do all of the talking, rather than encouraging your interviewers to do some of the talking too, and saying, well, what are you looking for, and what skills are you looking for somebody to bring, and what are the challenges that you are facing that I can potentially help you solve. Being curious in the way that you just outlined is perhaps one of our greatest opportunities to be of service to other people.
I'll just interject there that I am very happily employed, running my own business, but I still go on job interviews
Yeah.
from time to time, and because I enjoy the experience of sitting down with someone and in a high pressure, high stress environment, um, having a real human connection. And so I'll kind of, I know we're at the end of our time, but I'll just leave you with this idea that story is fundamentally, like, I picture this when I think about story, I picture being out in the middle of the African plains. The sun is going down. We're gathering around a campfire, and I'm watching my fellow tribesmen as the light flickers on their face. And then the old man steps to the center, and there's nothing to do. There's no iPhones, no Twitter, no Netflix, there's nothing. And he steps up and he begins to share story.
Hmm.
And when I think about this, it's like this kind of fundamental human experience. in telling story. And so you can absolutely ask for people to tell you stories. And I do it all the time. Is tell me a story. If you're in a job interview, because right now a lot of people are, you know, tell me a story of what success in this role might look like. And they're
Mhm.
going to give you so much more valuable intel than if you say, give me three things, because they're going to express their desire. They're going to express their motivations, what their values. It's all going to come out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, give story, ask for story, and you will find that you begin to just connect with people on such a deep and meaningful level.
This has been so helpful, Bryce, and so inspiring. I want to, do you have a few extra minutes if we stick around?
I do, yeah.
Wonderful. So this is what I want to start doing this week, and this is sort of the official end of our conversation. And I want to thank you. And for people who do need to leave now, where can they find you online to learn more about what you do and what Upper Creative does?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can go to uppercreative.com. You can find, that's my company. I would recommend, if you want to connect with me personally, find me on LinkedIn. Would be a great place. I'd be happy to connect with you there. But I will also say that you caught me at a kind of a good time. This is a very serendipitous moment. Because if you're on the call today and you want to experience this a little more, you want to practice, you want to lean into this. On Wednesday night, I'm actually running a workshop from 5 to 6:30 p.m. virtually. And if you want to sign up, you just head over to uppercreative.com/story. It's totally free. It's fun. I've been doing these once a week since this whole COVID thing started.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just been a really neat time to meet some really fun, cool people and just hear some incredible stories. So that would probably be the best way. And it would give us 90 minutes to really get to know each other. So I would love to have you on there. And again, that's uppercreative.com/story.
Excellent. Thank you for that. If people want found this experience valuable, I have scheduled an entire week of Harmony Insights lunch dates. They went so well last week that I filled up this week, and I have one already scheduled for next week. So if you want to be a part of those coming up later this week, we have a bunch of great conversations, including with Matt Elwell, who's joining us today. We're going to be talking about any number of things related to, I think, as he titled it, how to make virtual meetings less terrible. And knowing him, we're going to incorporate some improvisational comedy tenets into our conversation and talk about improv philosophy, which could be a lot of fun. So check that out, harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates.
Awesome.
Thanks to everybody who joined us today. Thanks to you, Bryce. And I hope people check you out online and join us later this week for another Harmony Insights lunch date, harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. Have a great afternoon, everyone.